All right, guys, doing what's this here? Q&A here for Garage Gym Life magazine. I always like to hold up a photo of a new book that I'm reading, so that was it. Let me get some better lights on here, and then we're gonna crush this Q&A. So I'm a little bit limited on time here, and see if I could read this. Uh, this comes from John Greaves, and he runs that website, Garage Gym Life Magazine Instagram page. I asked Stan Efferding the same question. You own two gyms, so you have access to equipment and training partners. Despite this, you also have a garage gym. How does having a home gym benefit you most? Is it a lab for experimentation or a sanctuary where you process things while moving? So, probably 5 months ago or so, I actually got rid of the garage gym. Not that everything is gone. I still have the climbing rope, the rings. I've got a couple of kettlebells in there, but my kids' stuff took over. Multiple mountain bikes, beach cruisers, BMX bikes, baseball equipment, tennis rackets everywhere. And I have a pretty nice sized garage with a high ceiling, so it was beautiful. Um, so I had to get rid of everything. But when I did first set up this home garage gym, I got a basic squat cage. I had the rings. I picked up a barbell set and had like 400 plus pounds. And I had just like a few kettlebells, and I loved the workouts in there. I loved training with the garage door open, being able to do sprints in the street, sled drags in the street, or floor presses, kettlebell swings, then walk outside and do kettlebell rowing, or I would do step ups up and down the stairs. I just loved the freedom and the fresh air. And my first house, where I set up the original underground strength gym, if you look back on videos from 2006 and prior, you'll see similar things, but I did not have a high ceiling, so I couldn't do barbell work overhead. So I would, experiment on myself, videos, and yeah, there was something pure about the simple garage gym setup. I'm such a purist that I was trying to see how can I maximize the training results from minimal equipment. So it was an experiment, and it was a way for me to prove what it was. And there was also like a feeling of solace to go there at the end of a long day, a long night, and do a workout at 9 or 10 o'clock with sweatshirts on and a hoodie on, and it's cold, and I'm not in the comfort of a gym with perfect heating, perfect air conditioning, and there's something beautiful about that. So now that's gone. Next competition. You competed in bodybuilding as a younger man. What did you take away from that experience that you still apply today? The day of a bodybuilding competition is often the least healthy day in a physique athlete's training cycle. Do you think that even with wear and tear injuries that you're healthier and stronger than you were when you were prepping for bodybuilding? So I competed in bodybuilding at age 18 and 19, and my left shoulder and right knee injury started bugging me. I remember sophomore or junior year in high school. And now, I've had three knee surgeries and one surgery to the left shoulder. And I always had asymmetry. My left shoulder and arm didn't put on muscle like my right side, and I can't explain why, but I wonder if that was certainly part of why the left side got injured. Um, Now, I was stronger in my mid 20s, that's for sure. I was squatting 455, 495. I had a different kind of strength back then. Once I got out of bodybuilding and began doing more ground based movements, more clean and press, more power cleans and weightlifting exercises, carries of all types, I developed a different kind of strength. So, in certain respects, I'm stronger. In other respects, I was stronger when I was bodybuilding. And I've been training for 30 years, so there's a different wear and tear on the body now than back then, which makes it tougher to do certain things today. So in those younger years, you got to take advantage of the health that you have. And I guess like your body is so new to everything, it's just so easy to get strong in your younger years, and that's probably why I get frustrated with athletes who don't take action and have a million excuses. So what do I apply today? When you want to put on size, you got to do those moderate and high rep ranges. You got to get some of that volume work in. So doing a split routine, there's nothing wrong with that. And the underground strength gym environment is very much modeled after Diamond Gym, which is like the West Side Barbell of bodybuilding. The music was loud. The expectations of being a worker was, expected amongst everybody, whether you were a competitor or not. The unspoken rule was shut your mouth and work hard. And that's the unspoken rule, or I don't want to say unspoken rule. I actually have to explain that to kids quite often that, hey, man, we're here to work. And there's nothing wrong with being a worker. Diamond Gym would open at 5 and close at 10. But I remember the first time I showed up thinking I'd be the first guy at 5 a.m. There was 30 something guys already in the gym, which means they probably opened up at 4:30 or 4:15, which says a lot about the discipline and the dedication of those guys. Um, Next question. I found that my training approach was affected heavily when I trained in Iraq during my deployment there. That reduced my dependence on barbells and dumbbells and made me into more of what you would call a soul lifter. Um, and that's a word he's quoting from me, using any tool necessary to get the job done. You trained in Israel. What lessons did you learn from that experience that affect how you train today? So when I trained in Israel at Avner's gym, it was so small, and the bench was also the squat rack. So we would have to pull the uprights out and turn them around, except the bench would flip. So there always had to be somebody sitting on the bench to weigh it down with the weights racked on it. And that it's not what I learned there. It was more the experience changed my life because it was during that time where I pulled myself out of depression and trained with Avner and Joe. And I've interviewed Joe for the Strong Life podcast, and how I competed and entered the Young Mr. Israel bodybuilding competition. It was all about just destroying that little gym. He had a cable crossover unit with a chin up bar. He had a barbell. He had a bunch of dumbbells, and I don't recall what machines he had. He may have had a lat pull down machine, maybe a leg extension, leg curl. Nothing fancy, but it was like it reminded me of these gyms that Arnold Schwarzenegger spoke about in the '60s, that were these little like health studios. And training with Joe and Abner, we just people just stared at us in disbelief with how intense it was. And those are the times I cherish: intensity and the ability to go full out with no injuries or tweaks on the body. I miss those days, and it hasn't hit me until recently that I'm kind of feeling the effects of my age. Next question. You're a huge fan of old school training, and while you cite Arnold's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding as a big influence, you go further back than that, like George Hackenschmidt and Arthur Saxon. In a day when everyone is looking at the next new fad, what gave you that love and appreciation for old time physical culturists? Arnold's encyclopedia used to inspire me so much. I would just flip it open, and those black and white photos, the intensity and the story behind the photos exploded from the books without even words being written underneath them. And I just loved the granite hard, tough looking physiques of those men. And then my research into seeing what old school strength was about brought me into those early 1900 times. And George Hackenschmidt's book, The Way to Live, I actually reprinted it. I called it the Russian Line Power Program, Russian Line Power Course, and just blended how George Hackenschmidt trained the mind and the body. And I loved that book was a part training manual, part autobiography, super inspiring. And his strength was insane, like a one arm overhead press or one arm overhead jerk with like 212 pounds. I mean, you can't fake results. And that dude was so strong through such a simple lifestyle, through such a simple training program. that it fires me up, and it'll always fire me up. So many of the old time lifts have tremendous value for today's athletes. The Steinborn lift saved my hips when no amount of foam rolling and flossing seemed to work. Wow. But with those exercises often comes a significant learning curve. What's your favorite old school lift to do personally that you'll only teach clients in person? I don't do really any out of the ordinary lifts that I teach the athletes. But some of the stuff I do, a Turkish get up, a bent press, I'll incorporate them, but not so much into the training of the athletes. Nothing too complex, especially because I'm training them in groups. But bent press was a big influence to me from those early 1900s. And I remember just feeling how it would kind of open up that T spine and develop like this strength in your lat and grip and shoulders. It just felt powerful being able to do that exercise. So that's an exercise I like to do, not necessarily one I teach. You were talking to the legendary coach Johnny Parker, and he mentioned that you should not only, quote, always expect the best from your athletes, but always give them your best as well, end quote. That leads me to parenting. One of the things that drove me crazy when my sons were youth wrestling is the number of parents who would scream at their kids to do things that it was apparent they couldn't do themselves. Like the overweight dad yelling for his kid to give 100% during conditioning, while his face was red from walking to the men's room and back. It drove me nuts, but I realized that lots of those people may not come from athletic backgrounds. What advice do you have for parents who may have never been in shape, who now have kids interested in sports? How could that father or mother begin to train so sports become a way to bond with their kids as opposed to being a glorified babysitter? What I try to explain to parents is your child is not going to get destroyed training with me. I'm playing the long game. So when they're in middle school, you're going to train twice a week, and we're not going to go 3 days a week until the end of seventh or the middle of eighth grade. And only when your son or daughter are bothering you saying, I want to go, can we go a third time this week? That's how we know they're falling in love with it. Number two, you could say all you want as a parent, but that quote of, your actions speak so loudly I can't hear a word that you're saying, meaning my kids used to see me training in the garage. They still see me doing farmer walks up and down the street and sprints and pull-ups, and to them it's normal to be strong. My son comes to the gym, my daughter comes to the gym sometimes to do their homework because my wife is maybe at work or doing whatever and they need to be with me. Well, they see everybody working hard, so they're normal. They think it's normal to be doing rope climbing and farmer walks and sled sprints and so on. But if they see you being lazy and being, overeating on crappy foods, then they will think that is normal and they won't be able to even understand what you're saying. So it's about being a leader through what you do, and screaming at your child doesn't help. There's certainly times where we need to push them, because if we say, oh, I'm leaving it up to him, I'm leaving it up to her, they'll take the easy way out. So kids do need to be told what to do. They do need guidance, but they also need a little bit of that opportunity to make mistakes and experience the pain of loss. And then we could hopefully have a conversation with them and say, okay, now let's make a correction from the struggles that you've made, and let's do some work so you don't have to lose that way. Although a real good example of the overbearing parents would be to watch. I don't know if it's on Netflix, but I believe it's called the Todd Marinovich Project, or the Marinovich Project, about how um, I believe it was Marv Marinovich. He was trained in the Soviet system of the 70s, I believe, and he was a strength coach in the NFL, maybe for the Chargers in the early 80s. So he understood the early days of sports specific training. It was a little bit extreme with how getting too specific, but he said to his son Todd, "Hey, if you're really serious about this football thing, I can train you to be the best if you want to do it." And his son said, "Okay." And then they said, as soon as his son said, "Okay," like it was full force, out of control. And His son, was a star player, I believe, at USC. I was about to say UCLA, USC. But then, because of the pressure and the burnout and really the craziness of the overbearingness, he got out of control with drugs and partying and lost his ability to be, the great athlete that he could have been. And he was great, but his decision making got flawed amongst all the stress. And I think as a parent, I'm never perfect, but I'm always trying to find, like, okay, if I push too hard, how do I just play with my kid? And Joe Ken gave me a great piece of advice. I loved it. He goes, there's a very fine line between being a coach and a father. And he goes, your kid needs you to be his dad. And that just reminded me that sometimes we just got to step back and let them figure things out on their own. It's a formula that will never be answered by anyone because every kid is different. So what advice do you have there? I gave that advice. Oh, how can the father or mother begin to train so sports become a way to bond with their kids? Go to the park, take your kids outside, do physical things with your kids versus only dropping them off. My dad used to go with me to the park to play basketball, or he would take us to the park to play soccer, pick up soccer games, whitewater rafting. He did those things with us versus dropping us off to do those things. And it gave me a real respect for being strong. The scenario I described from the wrestling room and from the youth and middle school football field is why one of the things we promote every chance we get is parents working out with their kids or working out while their kids are watching, leading from the front. How do you personally use training and exercise to bond with your kids? I was at the gym while my son was at basketball. We went and got something to eat, and then we played basketball outside. I played a little bit against him, then I did some drills with him, and he was having so much fun, like he was almost falling down laughing. So playing with them is the ticket. And I don't want to train in such a way where I'm unable to run or do the things that they want to do. So I try to spend a lot of time with my kids to have that kind of fun with them. I see your strong life philosophy as being a modern expression of physical culture, seeking to impact a person's spiritual and mental growth as well as their physical capabilities. You mentioned that during Hurricane Sandy, you had to carry fuel jugs. I was carrying a generator filled with gas in and out of my garage because people were stealing them from people's backyards. And heat going until crews could restore power. 2 weeks without power. In what other ways, other unexpected ways, has being active and capable positively impacted your life? So I'm trying to think of other ways being physically strong. I'd say that we're in a real dangerous place in this world. We see a lot of shootings and things that we never saw before. And thank God I've never been in that scenario. But my hope is that being physically strong might change somebody's mind about doing something or appearing to be physically strong. Um, we're in a world where I oftentimes find myself saying, like, I just don't fit in with this place. People want everything for free. There's mass shootings. People are fearing the work. Not everybody, but more and more are we looking for shortcuts and fads and hacks. What's the hack to this and the hack to that? You know, sometimes these questions, man, like I don't even know how to answer them, but I feel that being strong gives me the strength to handle a long work day and not break down from it and come back home and still have the energy to play with my kids and read to them. And being strong makes me better at every single thing I do. There's absolutely zero disadvantage to being strong. Let's see the next one. You're well known for decrying the lack of mental toughness in a lot of people, especially for young athletes. As a father who has coached others, I know that it's easier to get tough when the person you're coaching isn't your kid. Correct. You told Jim Steele, for example, and Jim Steele and I do a lot of podcasts together, that although football teaches important lessons, you don't want your son to play football until high school. What are some ways that you build mental toughness and emotional resiliency in your kids? So mental toughness, that word is certainly played out. Grit is a great book, and that's more of the word we're looking for. When my kids are tired, I tell them that you're tired because you chose to get to bed late. You're tired because you chose to eat food that's not healthy. You're tired because you didn't want to take that nap that I told you about. But we're still going to go to your sport practice because we signed up for it and we're going to be committed. We're going to be dedicated and we're going to follow through. And through them doing the uncomfortable things, they gain another ounce of strength, another ounce of internal strength and physical strength. And those little things add up. It's the compounding effect of doing things versus I'm going to do this one event and now I'm tough forever. It's the consistent, application of doing things that make you tough. Machine Gun Tongue said, hi, growth mindset for kids, the greatest gift. Certainly could be one of the greatest gifts because they could apply it to all things in their life. Your coaching. I don't know if I'm going to get to these. I'm going to cut it here and make it a part 2 for you guys because this is already 20 minutes in. So I'm going to make it a part 2. So stand by for that, guys. I'm Zach Evanesh, ZachEvanesh.com, Strong Life Podcast, UndergroundStrengthCoach.com. Stand by for part 2.